Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. And now, here's Aaron Harber.
Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. I'm your host, Aaron Harber, and my guest today from CNN is their chief national correspondent, John King. John, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure, Aaron. Good to see you.
It's great to see you again. Of course, it's been a long time. We'll talk about that in a little while, but I want to mention, of course...
Makes us veterans, not old, makes us veterans.
All right, I appreciate that. You were the senior White House correspondent for CNN for many years. Of course, I knew you in your earlier days when you were with the Associated Press.
Right. Print journalism for 12 years, then switched to television. It's been about 17 now in television. The first 9 of that, the 17 covering the White House, which is it's the best job you can have in journalism. It's also, in many ways, the most grueling job you can have in journalism outside of being a war correspondent or somewhere in a danger zone. Now I get to wander a little bit more. I still do some White House, some Congress, some politics, get out in the country, some national security issues. Every now and then, disasters, tsunami, tornadoes, that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, you have, speaking of wandering, I mean, you have a reputation of, I don't want to say wandering, but you've reported from all 50 states. You've covered 7 presidents or seven major elections. You also pioneered the CNN Magic Wall. I want you to talk about that in a moment or so. But actually that, when I first saw that, no one else was doing that. How did that come about?
It came about because my boss at the time, David Borman is his name. He's now left CNN and moved on to other things. But he's a very innovative, very think outside the box kind of guy, and he's a tech whiz. So he likes to try everything that's new. And so when he hears there's a new app or a new device or a new technology, he wants to try it. And so then one of the things he does, and he's a fascinating producer. He's an excellent TV producer if you're on the floor of a convention, if you're doing a big special event show. He's the kind of guy you want in your ear or in the control room because he's got a great eye for a story and for the visuals that make television more powerful. So what he would do every year is go to all of these shows, the consumer electronics shows, and he found some of the niche shows. And he actually found the Magic Wall at a national security show. It's where the contractors go. Boeing and Bechtel show off their products, and the military comes in, and the CIA comes in, and security private companies from all around the world, not just the United States, come and they look at what's new. Who's got the new weapon system? Who's got the new up armor for the Humvee? And he found in the back a company, Perceptive Pixel it was called at the time, that had this touch screen. And at that time, their biggest client, and I believe may still be their biggest client, but at the time CNN first bought it, was the quote-unquote intelligence community, largely the CIA. They used them because you can have a live feed coming in from a drone or a live feed coming in from the helmet of a special ops guy. You can put up the map, you can put up the plan, you can put up a schematic of where your other resources are. And David looked at it and said, you know what? In television, especially in politics, we can do some business with that.
I'm afraid to ask, what does something like that cost, or what did it cost back then?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know the entire nuts and bolts, but I do know at one point in the election when we were first unveiling it in 2008 that we had more than $1 million of software involved. Proprietary software, some of it proprietary software that was written for CNN to do the election application, so you could go into every county, so you could go back and look at the historical data. Most of that data, the actual election night data, whether it's a primary night, remember that's we had the great Clinton-Obama race that year, as well as a decent Republican primary that was forgotten. McCain won in the end that first year, but it was contentious for a while too. On those election nights, that's live data coming in. Just like you'd sit around in the office in the old days when I was at the AP, it's our guys going out to the counties and getting it, and you feed it into the system, and newspapers and radio stations and television stations all around the country and the world are getting it. So I could be talking about a county and saying, as you can see, Obama is carrying X county right now, and the color would change while I was speaking. I said, well, not anymore. Senator Clinton is now carrying that that county. And that's the charm of it, is that you get instant advice. But I think the gift of it, if used right, and I was a skeptic at first, to be honest, but you can use gizmos as toys, and sometimes we do that in television, bright lights, flashy, shiny things, people wow, or tools. And if you use it as an information tool, I think what it helped do is it helped take people there. If you'd never been to that county in Indiana that was the big, going to decide who won that primary. If you hadn't been, how was it that Obama got so far ahead in New Hampshire that night, but Hillary Clinton came back to beat him? Where were those votes coming from? A guy on TV in a box talking about that and throwing out numbers, your eyes glaze over pretty quickly. Having the visual to take people there and show them, and then to go back and say, well, here's why, she might still get more, because here's a historical look at that county. Here's who lives there, because you can put the census data in there. You can color code it. Are they white? Are they Latino? How many African Americans? So as an information tool, we realized, wow, this is a very powerful device. And every week we thought of new ways to make it more relevant, we hope.
Yeah, no, it was. I think it's such a great approach, great technique. Of course, you were the anchor of John King USA and State of the Union. Tell me a little bit about those programs, those experiences, what you liked most about them, and what you didn't like about them.
As you get older, you realize what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And I was asked to do The Daily Show when Lou Dobbs left CNN. If I was ever asked to do it again, I would probably be much more reluctant. It's just not my strength. There are some very gifted daily anchors, and having gone through the experience, especially when there's not a busy news day, to be able to find a way to put together an interesting and compelling show, to try to be able to keep your personal energy up so that the viewer is engaged, even though it might not be an earth-shattering news day. It's a gift, and so I have a great, even more respect for the legendary anchors, if you will, and some very good ones who just are in our business today. I don't like to sit at a desk and read a teleprompter, and again, that's not a criticism of anybody who does that. It's a skill, and it's important to have a person who plays traffic cop over the day's news, and they need to be in one place, and they need to be sitting at a desk, and they need to be the CEO, if you will, of the news of that day or the news of that hour. It's just not my greatest strength. I like to get out on the road and travel. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about transitions and writing and the use of pictures. And if I ever did do it again, I hope I would be better at it. The Sunday show I loved. The Sunday show is where you get to be more thoughtful. You get to have 10 or 15 or 20 minutes with your guests and talk to them a little bit about themselves, what makes them tick, maybe their history, which then when you're asking them about the pressing news issue of the day, I think helps the viewer or the listener, however someone's consuming that information, even if they're reading the transcript, get a better sense of the person because you have a little bit more time to let it breathe. So I love that because you could do a couple of big interviews on whatever the big story of the day was, then maybe a human interest story, and the great thing CNN allowed me to do for that show was I traveled every week as well. And that was the first year of the Obama presidency. And I'd been to most of them anyway, but I visited all 50 states in the first 52 weeks, the first year of the Obama presidency. And it was a beast. This was a lot of travel. I had two producers who split it up, and they always laughed at me that they got to split it. But I had to go to all 50. But I loved it. I was exhausted, but I learned so much. There are a lot of people in Washington who are experts in Washington, who I think are very smart, and I listen to, and they talk about what's happening in Washington. But I don't listen to them so much when they start telling me what's happening out in the country. Because you can't understand what's happening out in the country unless you get out in the country. Because the 50 pieces of the puzzle are so different, and they're so fascinating. And I think you also come to respect, there are people on the left who just can't understand the Tea Party movement. They don't respect it, and they don't respect those people. And there are people on the right who don't respect, liberal organizations and progressives and their views on certain issues. So whether it's abortion, whether it's Gitmo, we can go across the spectrum. And that's sad, and it's one of the reasons our politics is broken right now, is because you can passionately disagree with somebody, but if they're arguing a policy position that they firmly believe, you should at least respect their view. That's the gift of America. And you get a much greater appreciation for that gift if you travel, and you see how much different Omaha is from Manhattan, and how much different, even places within the state of Texas. I was recently in Texas, going around the state to explore this question, is Texas turning blue? And even there, you can be just 2-hour drive from one place, and it feels like you're in a very different place. And that's the gift of our country, and it's both the blessing and at times, the curse in the sense of the frustration of our politics. It's hard to reach consensus, but some of that consensus is hard to reach because we have, children in Washington, in the House and the Senate and in the executive branch, and being overly critical and being a little bit cynical. But part of it is because of the personal, polarized political stunts. But some of it is because the people in our country have very different opinions on gun control, depending on where you're standing on that day. Very different opinions on abortion rights, depending on where you're standing that given day. And that's a legitimate hard issue. It's hard because it's hard. It's hard because people disagree. And in a democracy, when people disagree, you got to try to work it out. And so I just love the traveling. It's a long, rambling answer, but I love the traveling.
That's all right. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with John King of CNN.
You have 435 House districts, and in any given cycle, maybe 35 or 40 districts are truly competitive after Labor Day. That's not a healthy democracy.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. The purpose of my program is to engender discussion in a format which promotes civil discourse. That is why you don't see a lot of shouting on the program or any chair throwing. My approach is to give guests a chance to tell you their opinions and explain the basis for those opinions. I believe guests reveal themselves when given a chance to fully speak their minds, as opposed to being limited to a few minutes or even just several seconds, as is often the case today on television. To make certain everyone feels welcome, I always try to make certain the programs are nonpartisan. That is why you see both Democrats and Republicans on the show, as well as people who are not affiliated with either major party. And by being nonpartisan, I'm able to bring guests to you from a broad spectrum of leadership across America and the world. Please feel free to tell me about the job you think I am doing and how we could improve the show. All you have to do is send an email to aaron@harbertv.com.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com. Now back to the Aaron Harber Show.
Welcome back to the show. I'm with John King from CNN. How has politics changed, and also how has journalism changed? Let's start with politics.
I think we saw the deepening of the polarization that we have today. You could trace back to the Clinton administration. Some of that was policy disputes. A lot of that was the Monica Lewinsky and the subsequent impeachment and Ken Starr investigation, which put people off in their corners and made things very tense and toxic in Washington. Carried over, you had a contested election that I think, to their credit, both Vice President Gore and George W. Bush handled very well once the decision was finally made. I thought they handled it like men, like gentlemen, and like Americans, patriots, if you will. I thought the Vice President was very gracious in saying, you know, the court has spoken, and moving on. And the President came in, President Bush came in and did a lot of outreach. And he had this opportunity after 9/11, which came so soon. If you think about how different the Bush presidency would have been, 9/11 came so soon in that presidency. He had an opportunity, I think, to bring the country together and minimize that polarization, make a lot of it go away. And he did for a while. But then Iraq restoked it. And Katrina came in after that. And there became not only a competence question about the administration, why couldn't it run the war in a more efficient way, a more successful way? Why couldn't it do more immediately and in the days and weeks and months after Katrina? There was a competence question, but it became a very partisan question as well. And so we got back to the polarization. And when that happens, I think one of the things that we have lost in Washington is a circuit breaker. When that happens in any relationship, you have to find a way to break the ice or to change the topic or to do something to fix the dynamic. And we've lost the circuit breaker. And the circuit breaker in the old days, if you look back at the history, I came at the very tail end of the Ronald Reagan administration. George H.W. Bush already won the election, so I was there during the transition period of time. And even in those days, the people around Reagan and Tip O'Neill, they would call each other, dirty, rotten SOBs during the day. And every now and then they'd make sure that they had a drink, or that their chiefs of staff, had a drink, or, I'm not suggesting people have to run out and drink. Meet for a cup of coffee. Do something. There was a conversation. There was an understanding somewhere back here, that we've crossed a line and we have to get back onto the civil side. It was an instinct. There's no rules. There's not a book that says this is when you do it. But those instincts, or that book, if you will, has been thrown away in Washington. And everybody's to blame. On this given story, you might say it's President Obama's fault. On that given story, it might have been, the Senate's Democrats' fault. On this one, it might be the House Republicans' fault. We can go through every one of them and make our own call on who we think is to blame. But there's a collective lack of leadership, and I think of commitment to finding that circuit breaker. And part of that is they don't know each other as well. They don't trust each other as much. They don't spend enough time with each other because they're running home all the time. And because of how contested it is. My personal opinion is that one of the biggest challenges our country faces is the fact that the House is not competitive. You have 435 House districts, and in any given cycle, maybe 35 or 40 districts are truly competitive after Labor Day. That's not a healthy democracy. If you don't have competition, then you feel no urgency to listen to and respect and to communicate with the other side. If you go home to a district, it's an echo chamber because of the way they drew the lines. What are you going to learn? That's what I don't understand. My passion in my job, and the reason I love my job, is that I get paid to learn. I had to borrow every dime I had to get through college. Now I get paid to learn. I think it's fabulous. And I'm disappointed if I leave the office at the end of the day and I haven't learned something new, then I failed today. So why don't these guys want to learn? Why don't they want to sit down with the person who's the polar opposite ideologically? See, tell me why you think that way, and not interrupt him, and not run onto a cable news program and say he's an idiot, or he's a dope, or he's un-American. And it's both ways.
So two questions then. One, why isn't there that interest? And how do we, given the redistricting challenge, what can we do about that? And in terms of the relationship, is there any way to change that?
Yes, let me do them backwards. I think the relationship part takes leadership. And I do think, again, the blame belongs to everybody. I do think in his second term, this president, any president, this is not because he's a Democrat, it's not because he's Barack Obama, you only have one president. So that person has the unique platform, even if it's not his fault or her fault in the future, to try to fix things. When the communications break down, even if it is the other party's being obstructionist and being obnoxious.
What could he do that he hasn't done?
He could, number one, he could insist on more meetings and open them up, maybe try to convince the leaders, we're going to open up to the public. Instead of that, now usually if it's the congressional leadership, sometimes we get nothing. Maybe we get a photo. Say, we're going to invite the press in for 5 or 10 minutes and we're going to talk and the cameras are going to roll on it. Maybe they'd say no, but that would tell you something. Are they willing to be transparent to go down? Now, some of that would be acting, some of that would be talking points. We know that. If they all knew the camera was going to be in the room for 5 minutes, they would preen for the cameras and then the real me. But that's okay. It at least gets them in the practice of having to talk. Both President Bush and Bill Clinton, when they were trying to deal with Social Security and issues like that, took the other guys on the road. I remember traveling with Bill Clinton and Rick Santorum, right? Not exactly ideological, buddies. When Clinton was trying to deal with Social Security and entitlement issues, and he had a town hall out in Kansas City. Go out and talk to the people. Get out of Washington. If the problem is in Washington, if there's something in the water that keeps these people from talking and trusting in Washington, then get out. And go have town halls and let average Americans who, whether it was just through the fiscal crisis, whether it's through their own home economies, they've all had to sit down and figure this out. They've had to sit down and deal with their budgets. We can't pass a budget in Washington. What did every American family have to do in 2008 and 2009? They had to sit down, they had to make a list. How much we got coming in? What are the bills? What's got to go? Timmy's going to the state college instead of Yale. We're going to have to refinance. Or we're not going on vacation this year. We're not buying a new car this year. We're going to have to, fix the dishwasher, not buy a new dishwasher. Those decisions, and you could go on and on and on, were painful for all those families. And rich families had to do them as well as poor families because the whole world got flipped over on its head. But they did it. They did it. Why can't Washington do that? Everybody in America is having to do it. And those people, I don't know, are they Democrats? Are they Republicans? Are they hard right Republicans? Are they middle of the road Republicans? They did it. And so if families have to figure this out and they don't have the whole infrastructure of government to help them and people who are doing all the research to crunch the numbers for them, then why can't the people we send to Washington do it? There's something fundamentally broken in the system. And the greatest gift, as I was saying earlier, for my work is to get out of Washington because you learn so much from talking to whether it's the guy who picks you up at the airport in the cab, whether it's the waiter or the waitress at the diner, whether it's the factory worker when you go to some factory that's in some town, maybe when you're standing outside a factory that's just closed and the people are coming out and realizing their lives have just been flipped. Maybe it's after Joplin or after Katrina. The American people at their worst and when they're being most tested somehow always manage to do their best. Why can't our elected officials even get halfway to that? I don't get it. They're smart people. They're smart people. There are a lot, part of the problem is, you mentioned our business. We have this instantaneous scorekeeping now. It's ESPN on steroids. There are, so many blogs on the left, so many blogs on the right, plus the quote-unquote media organizations. So, we have them on for these, gladiator shows on television where, heat is better than light, right? So we'll have them have a big fight instead of light. But they're also scored within their own parties. And you'll get all these emails, and I'm sure you get them. You get these emails, you get these tweets, all these blog postings. Marco Rubio just did X, Harry Reid just did Y. And it's done on a minute-by-minute basis. And what's it always say at the bottom? Join the cause, please send money. The money in politics and the instantaneous grading of politics has just made that nobody has time to stop and breathe, I think, and think, let's not look over the next blog posting or the next hour of cable television or the next fundraiser. Why don't we look at the next month and the next year and what is this student loan fight that's happening in Washington? What will that horizon look like for the next 2, 3, 5 years? Budgets, entitlements. Can we take a 10-year view or at least a 5-year view as opposed to a 5-minute view? I think that would be helpful.
We are going to take a breath and we'll be right back with John King.
Coming up next.
As we have this conversation today, we know today's technology. Next year there'll be something new. You mentioned my magic wall early on. New things come along. You adapt or you die. But if we adapt, the thirst for information is greater than ever, and I think the business has enormous future.
Your opinions, ideas, suggestions, and criticisms related to guests, topics, questions, or the host are welcome. Please send an email to producer@harbertv.com.
I'm Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland.
Hi, I'm Jim Cameron, Director of Avatar.
I'm Christina Johnson, former Undersecretary of Energy.
Hi, I'm Oliver Stone.
Hi, I'm Mike Peters. I'm the creator of Mother Goose and Grimm.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
I would encourage you to watch the Aaron Harber Show. It's good fun.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show because he's a really cool guy.
Please watch the Aaron Harber Show, on which I do appear.
I want you to watch the Aaron Harber Show. Grimmy watches it every day.
To obtain a DVD copy of this program, please contact info@harbertv.com. Now back to the Aaron Harber Show.
Welcome back to the show. I'm with John King. John, with just a few minutes left, it's time for some rapid fire, as it were. I want a quick assessment or how you contrast the relationship, including the relationship with the press, between presidents in the press. And let's start off with George H.W. Bush.
A gentleman, our last link to the greatest generation of World War II. Cable television was just coming on the scene, and they didn't have to deal with the Twitterverse and the blogosphere, so it's a different in terms of press relations. I think, and he's been ill in recent years, so when we lose George H.W. Bush, I think we will all step back. I think he's one of our most underestimated and underappreciated presidents. Look what happened. The Berlin Wall fell on Ronald Reagan's watch, but all of that happened on George H.W. Bush's. There were nuclear weapons all around Eastern Europe. There was uncertainty in all of those countries. Go Lithuania, Latvia, Slovenia, Estonia, just look at the map. And nothing happened. Nothing horrible happened. The transitions were rough. The transitions are tough. Some of them are still going on in some of those places. But Bush and his foreign policy team managed the world at an extraordinarily difficult time. And I think history will remember that incredibly fondly.
Bill Clinton.
A great communicator, a crusty guy, a combative guy, a product of the South. His politics were mostly on the Democratic side, but if he was mad at you, he would let you know. He called me Johnny. Only Bill Clinton and my mother called me Johnny. It was a Southern thing. A great temper, but a policy guy. And the Clinton cabinet was almost irrelevant in those days. Nice people, don't get me wrong, good public servants, whether you agree or disagree with the politics of the administration. They were wonderfully talented people, but all the policy was run out of the White House. That's what he was. A shame, because the personal failings, I think, made his second term a waste. And again, whether you liked him or not, the man had a gift.
All right, how about George W. Bush?
To use his own words, I think misunderestimated as a politician. Democrats have this narrative that he's sort of this rube who fell off the apple cart somewhere in Texas, and somehow managed to be president. Sorry, you don't beat Ann Richards, a very good politician, governor of Texas. You don't beat her when she's at 55% approval unless you're a damn good politician. You don't beat Al Gore at a time you had a very good economy. And the Bush campaign put together a good election. He is. The interesting part was, I think, in the cultural arc of our country, George W. Bush, remember, he closed the 2004 campaign with his reelect me constitutional amendment for traditional marriage. Just 8 years later, Barack Obama's on the steps of the Capitol talking about same-sex marriage. So Bush will be remembered for being a better politician than most people gave him credit for, but I also think he was fighting on the social terrain at a time the ground underneath him was shifting.
All right, Barack Obama.
Incomplete, obviously, because we're in the middle of the second term. A man with considerable gifts. I think that one of the things we have seen that is true, and friends of this president will say that, is his lack of chief executive experience before he took the job, I think, has undermined his ability to get things done. I think also he's in a polarized partisan environment, as that I've said before, he is responsible for. It's not all his fault, but he's trying to live through this environment. And I think in the second term now, the big question is, here's a man who is such a gifted communicator, who is such a gifted politician. What does he have to show for it? Can he get things done? And again, it's not all his fault. And I'm not agreeing with his policy positions. That's not my job. My job is to cover them, not to endorse them. But I think there's a huge question mark about how much he will be able to get done in the second term. A lot of people who are big supporters of this president worry that they're going to end with a big capital D disappointment.
How has public access to government officials changed since you entered the fray?
I will say this, that this administration came in saying it would be the most transparent in history, and some of us thought that was to believe that we would also be able to get more access to people and more access to records. and they have not delivered on that promise. That's just a fact. It's not a partisan statement, it's just a fact. It ebbs and flows. Bill Clinton would be easily accessible, and the people around him easily accessible at times, and then if he thought for his political reasons, or if he was mad at you, he held grudges, they would shut you down. George W. Bush actually had a pretty open White House, and again, most people think, oh, Republicans are anti-press. He had been around the Reagan days and his dad's days, and he'd run the campaigns. He'd been in Texas. Actually likes talking to reporters, likes the small talk of politics, what's going on in that Senate race. You know, Bush loved that stuff personally. So if you ever had a chance with him, he would love to have those little private conversations with you. And his administration was, again, they all know how to drop the dam down and stop the flow of information when they think it helps them. But I think they were more open than most people would have thought coming in.
What are your thoughts about the decision of some media organizations to promote a specific point of view?
John King, former Associated Press reporter, old school, trained by some of my heroes or legends in our business, and some fair, objective journalists, personally doesn't like a lot of it. But I will say this: we all wage our lives and our jobs under the same First Amendment. It's a successful business model. If you're looking at Fox, you're looking at MSNBC, you're looking at others, and I don't begrudge them that. I think sometimes it contributes to the coarseness and to the polarization of our political debate. I also trust the common sense of the American people to know that if they're watching John King, it's very different than watching Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow or Al Sharpton. You trust the voters on this. They know what it is. They know the difference between news and advocacy. They have every right to the First Amendment, and I would never, ever, ever say, well, can't allow that in politics or can't allow that, because that's a slippery slope. And so I may not like some of it, but let the flowers bloom. That's the gift of the First Amendment.
All right, one of the challenges that media organizations face, and again, when you look back when you started, the number today of programs, of channels, of networks for news, and all the other forms of media on the web, social media, et cetera, how has that challenged media organizations in terms of their survival, and I mean survival financially, so they can afford to do things?
Well, some have not survived, and others are struggling. My network has gone through some ruts, and I think at the moment right now we're in a rebuilding phase, and I'm very happy with that, and I'm very proud of our current management for seeing that. Some of it are, for any organization, some of them are your internal shortcomings. What are you doing wrong? Do you have the right people? Are your shows aiming at the right North Star? But some of it's just a change in the business. Technology is changing our business so fast that you used to be, Walter Cronkite sat in the chair at 6:30 at night and you had no choice. That's where you got your news. Now you can get your news where you want it, when you want it, how you want it, anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world, just about. If you've got access to the internet, you have access to it. So you don't have to turn on John King at X time and on every day. It's obnoxious to think that you can tell people you must watch my show at this time. And so the whole paradigm of information flow has changed. However, I'm an optimist. I tell young people who say I should not be a journalist now, right, because the business is in such trouble. The business is in transition, just like the American automobile industry went through a transition, just like Xerox back in the day. Remember, it was the biggest American company, and then boom, it disappeared almost. Technology, global economy are forcing transitions. Every business gets lazy and slow to get ahead of that curve. Most only start about the hard work when they get hit in the head and they start losing money or bleeding. I know my company is working very aggressively at this. The thirst for information is greater than ever. We have to figure out how to deliver it. Some people get it at CNN.com. Some people will get it through their little snippets on their mobile devices. They want the information. So if we figure out a way to be value added, there's a lot of noise out there. So you better be value added. Let them know that if I watch this person or this network or this place, I'm getting something extra. I'm getting a little extra insight, a little extra information, something that I want. Be value added, be relevant to their lives. People are busy. They're working 2 jobs. They got their kids. They got crazy stuff going on. They don't have time for fluff. Maybe they want sports. I'm not saying they don't have diversity of opinion of what they want. Maybe they want Hollywood news, but give them what they want in a compelling, relevant way. So be value added, be relevant, and be nimble, because as we have this conversation today, we know today's technology. Next year there'll be something new. You mentioned my magic wall early on. New things come along. You adapt or you die. But if we adapt, the thirst for information is greater than ever, and I think the business has an enormous future.
John King, thanks so much.
Pleasure, Aaron. Thank you.
Great having you. Thanks for watching. That was John King of CNN. This is Aaron Harber. We'll see you next time.